Hey, what's up? Today I want to talk to you about a single physical process that explains why Joe Rogan is the king of podcasting, why rivers form the way they do, why scientific citations cascade towards a small handful of papers. It also explains the emergence of monopolies and why the 80-20 rule shows up in virtually every domain. These things have all been treated as separate. Economists talk about this as network effects or increasing returns to scale. Biologists have their own terms: runaway selection, competitive exclusion. Sociologists see this same thing and call it the Matthew effect. Network scientists say preferential attachment. Each field independently discovered that concentration happens, and they gave it a name, and they mostly stopped there. I've derived an equation that shows these aren't separate phenomena at all. They're the same thermodynamic process operating across different substrates. It's the same equation, different parameters, identical physics. I call this process Autocatalytic Gradient Concentration, or AGC for short. I want to walk you through it because it's both more rigorous and more intuitive than you might expect. Let's start with a river. Rain falls down onto a hillside in a more or less uniform way, but the ground it falls on isn't perfectly flat. There are small random depressions in it that change the way the water flows. One of those depressions happens to capture just slightly more water than its neighbors, and that little bit of extra water erodes the channel just a little bit deeper than the others. The deeper channel then begins to form a steeper gradient, and the steeper gradient captures even more water from the surrounding area. That water further deepens the channel, and within hours, the uniform sheet of rain has become a flow through a single dominant channel, draining the entire hillside. Over enough time, that same channel would become a river. Nobody designed that river. Nobody chose it. It emerged because four things happened in a sequence. 1, a small random asymmetry led to 2, preferential routing of water toward the path of least resistance, and 3, a self-amplifying feedback loop where each bit of captured flow increased the capacity to capture future flow, and then 4, lock-in. Once the channel is carved, reversing it costs more energy than maintaining it. Now watch what happens when I describe Amazon's rise using the exact same 4 steps. In the early days of e-commerce, Amazon gains a small initial advantage in logistics, selling books. Customers begin preferentially routing towards this better experience. More customers attract more sellers. Then better prices attract more customers. It becomes self-amplifying feedback. And then comes the lock-in, the infrastructure, the Prime subscriptions, and then third-party sellers become dependent. Reversing this process now requires more energy than maintaining the status quo. These structures don't just happen to represent similar processes in nature. Their structure is identical because the physics behind them is identical. Both are cases of autocatalytic gradient concentration, systems processing energy gradients that spontaneously concentrate flow into dominant pathways through positive feedback. So let me give you the equation itself because it's simple enough to explain verbally, actually. The rate of change of any node's advantage equals its capture efficiency times the total available flow times its current advantage raised to the power of gamma divided by the sum of everyone's advantage raised to gamma minus its maintenance costs. So everything in this depends on gamma. Gamma is the feedback amplification exponent. It measures how much your current advantage amplifies your rate of future gain. When gamma is less than 1, you get diminishing returns, stability. The system self-corrects towards an even distribution. Imagine a website that gets so covered with ads that no one uses it anymore. Initially, the concentration of ads is what drove their growth, but at a certain threshold, the increased concentration results in diminished returns. It's like a restaurant that got too popular and the quality starts to suffer. So when gamma equals 1, Returns are linear. Things stay roughly proportional. But when gamma exceeds 1, this is the critical threshold. Positive feedback takes over, and concentration becomes mathematically inevitable. This is not a tendency, not a probability. It's a theorem. The earlier uniform distribution becomes an unstable equilibrium. Another example. Say you have a bunch of seedlings that sprout at the same time in the forest. As they grow, they compete for the same sunlight. One grows just slightly taller than the next, and it captures more light, and it grows taller. And as it does so, it starts shading its neighbors. And that shade then slows their growth, which lets it capture even more light. The canopy ends up closing around a few winners, and everything underneath is suppressed. And gamma is measurable in every domain. Social media platforms operate with gamma around 2 or higher because algorithmic amplification creates extreme positive feedback. Compound financial returns have a gamma of around 1.05 to 1.1. It's low but relentless across decades, which is why wealth through investing concentrates on longer timescales. Urban sprawl might run at a gamma of 1.3 to 1.5. Platform markets like Amazon or Uber might sit at a gamma of 1.8 to 2.5. Different gammas, different timescales, but they all have the same inevitable outcome if gamma exceeds 1. And that's autocatalytic gradient concentration. But you might be thinking, well, there's an obvious objection. If concentration is inevitable whenever a gamma exceeds 1, why doesn't everything concentrate into a monopoly? Why do, say, thousands of craft breweries exist? Why are there multiple streaming services? And the answer is simple. Things do concentrate inevitably whenever the conditions allow. Those craft breweries followed the same pattern, just on a smaller scale, on smaller gradients. When entities occupy different gradients, different niches, or different resource access, say like a different customer base, concentration only occurs according to the local energy landscape. So many craft breweries can coexist because they serve orthogonal markets, different localities, different customer taste preferences, and so on. Streaming services partially coexist because their gradients partially overlap. They all compete for entertainment time, but Netflix and Disney Plus and Crunchyroll are like 3 independently concentrating water flows on a larger hillside. It's not that they are concentrating to whatever degree their environment and capacity will support. Think about Amazon. It went from just selling books to the everything marketplace to cloud computing. Google went from search to advertising to email to maps to documents to AI. Each captured gradient funds the capture of the next one. Each iterative success further concentrates. AGC predicts this directly. Once an entity dominates in one gradient, expect expansion into adjacent gradients. What does this mean? Well, I'll give it to you in 3 words. It means inevitable cascading monopoly. So what about Joe Rogan? How did he become king, and how does AGC apply to him? Well, in the early days, say around 2005 to 2015, the podcasting world was fragmented. There were low barriers to entry, no dominant distribution platforms, no algorithmic recommendations, and there was very little ad revenue. Gamma was close to 1 because there was little amplification mechanism beyond the word of mouth. Rogan started in 2009 as one show among thousands with a modest built-in audience that he might have brought over from popularity through Fear Factor or UFC, and a commitment to honest delivery. And he had a kind of dominant but likable personality. In 2009, these were small initial asymmetries on a mostly flat gradient. Over time, though, these advantages led to more listeners, and more listeners made the show more valuable for booking guests. Better guests then brought on even more listeners. The channel deepened, which captured more flow, which deepened it further. When platforms added algorithmic recommendation, the gradient steepened. Every new listener triggered recommendations that routed more attention into the already deepest channel. One depression on an otherwise flat gradient compounded into a river that now collects about 10% of all podcast streams. This equation that I derived that unifies these disparate domains of science dissolves false dichotomies that have stalled thinking across multiple fields. Is like a good example is monopoly a market failure? And the answer would be no. It's what gradients do when feedback is superlinear. The question was never why do monopolies form, but why would anyone expect monopolies not to form? Another such false dichotomy is inequality a policy failure or is it a natural law? Well, when gamma exceeds 1 on a shared gradient, and any compounding returns ensure that it does, concentration is the equilibrium state. You can only counteract it through continuous energy input, just like we can only pump water out of a deep well by adding energy. When the pump loses power, the gradient reasserts itself and no water comes out. Network effects, increasing returns, runaway sexual selection, and preferential attachment, these are all the same process with different parameters. My theoretical work also clarifies why concentration doesn't last forever. Optimization at one scale necessarily degrades function at other scales. This is what I call the law of scale antagonistic selection. It's the fundamental driver of evolution. A monopoly that efficiently extracts surplus at the company level degrades innovation at the broader market level and destabilizes the political system at the societal level. Concentration continues until all of these cross-scale tensions trigger a phase transition, which is a rapid reorganization of the energy flows. This could be something like an antitrust action, a revolution, or even systemic collapse. So wherever you see concentration, you'll also find its eventual disruption. So here's the core claim, stated as plainly as I can. When multiple entities compete for the same energy gradient with positive feedback, concentration occurs through a deterministic physical process. The substrate doesn't matter. Water, capital, attention, citations, mating access. The physics is identical. Rivers form, monopolies form, prestige hierarchies form, power law distributions emerge, and they do so for the exact same reason, governed by the same equation, differing only in their parameters. AGC is just a small component of a larger thermodynamic theory of the universe and human behavior that I've been developing for the past year. Please give this video a like if you found this interesting. If you want to learn more about the foundational physical laws that I've discovered that this work emerges from and the broader implications for understanding both our civilization and our social behavior as humans, I'll be sharing a lot more about that work here on this channel. The technical framework for AGC is going to be linked in the description below if you want to look at the math and the full list of canonical examples for that. Well, anyway, I'm Animal Taggart. Thanks for watching. I appreciate your attention and time. This is my first time trying to do a video from a script, so I'm sure it was a little rough, but just remember out there, it's not over till it's over. Thanks.